0.065 non-significant.
It's not significant, right?
Did you consider maybe looking at the interaction of those two?
Yeah, and that's I'll talk about that next. Actually, did well, sort of, and you can comment on it.
Certainty only matters when risk, when
Exactly.
severity is high.
Okay, so what I did, because that's kind of contradicts the theory as well. The theory would say both certainty and severity matter, and in my results there, I found that really only severity matters. So it wasn't the fact that people feel like they're going to get caught, but it was how severe they thought the punishment was, or if the punishment was perceived as being more severe, then they were less likely to engage in those activities. So again, I did a little bit more digging, and what I found was it depends on. I had the data, so this helped me. It depends on how moral people said they were. So I found some literature, and it makes a little bit of sense. So people that are more moral or perceive themselves as good people, right? For them, the impact of getting caught and getting punished may not matter. So you're saying, well, I would never do that anyway. I would never engage in that misuse activity because I'm a good person. Whereas someone that's maybe not as moral, or I shouldn't say not as moral, but does not perceive those behaviors as morally wrong, they may need these formal sanctions. They may need to feel like they're going to get caught and to get punished to influence them. Okay, so there was some literature that would suggest that. And my results were a little bit interesting. That they kind of bore that out. So this is what I was getting to. The research suggests that the influence of perceived certainty and perceived severity depends on moral considerations. So there is kind of an interaction effect. Interaction basically meaning it depends. So the threat of punishment is irrelevant or just generally much weaker for people that are more moral. So I split the sample into two groups, and basically for that variable for moral commitment, the question that asked them on a scale of 1 to 7 how morally acceptable you thought each of those misuse scenarios were, basically took the median of the responses. People that were above the median, they were considered more moral. People below the median were considered the less moral people. Okay, and then ran the statistics again on both of those groups. Okay, so a high moral group and a low moral group, and this just sums up those responses. So the people in the high moral commitment group, people that feel like they're more moral, or again, I should say, perceive those behaviors as not morally acceptable. Okay, the path from perceived certainty to intention was significant. Now again, remember before here with the total sample, okay, where everything mixed together, it was not significant. So that's saying that people that are more moral, there is an impact for perceptions of getting caught. Okay, so for people that are more moral, the threat or the perceived risk of getting caught has an impact. But you'll notice that relationship from PS, perceived certainty, to intention does not. And then it's opposite for the low moral commitment people. So if people that feel that are less moral, getting caught didn't seem to matter, but the severity of punishment matters. So, anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I can see. So if you don't believe this is wrong, then really what concerns you is being punished. You're not so much afraid of getting caught because you don't think this is wrong, but
the severity.
But it's the punishment. Whereas if you think this is wrong and you're doing it anyway, you kind of just being exposed is
you don't like that.
Is kind of a self-punishment.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's basically what it's saying.
Well, it's still an interesting.
Well, I think if you kind of look at this from the practical perspective, then in terms of if you were a security manager or a manager in any way, how would you kind of evaluate this data? And I think it kind of one thing it says is, well, the impact of when we looked at the whole sample, the impact of getting caught, the PC relationship was not significant. But then when we split it down and we looked at the different types of morality levels, it did have an impact. So in general, it's saying both perceptions of getting caught and punished severely do have an impact, assuming you have kind of a mishmash of people in your organization that some might see these behaviors as morally acceptable, some might see them as not morally acceptable. So I think there is an importance there of both the PC and the PS, okay, the perceived certainty and the perceived severity. And considering that we see that security policies CETA programs and monitoring impact those two factors in different ways, it speaks to the value of these type of deterrents as well as having at least an indirect effect.
One thing before you go on from this, the moral commitment seems to be the biggest impact.
Exactly, yeah.
And are there other things that correlate well with moral commitment? How is that achieved? What is it that leads to high moral commitment? Do you go into that at all?
I don't really, but that kind of leads me, in doing this, the result, if you look at the numbers, and those numbers there are just the strengths of the relationships, you can see there the one from moral commitment to IS misuse intention has the highest number. It basically means of all these factors I've looked at, moral commitment has the largest impact on whether people say they would engage in these activities. So even more so than getting caught and getting punished, and the impact of these deterrents on that, moral commitment has a stronger effect. So in going forward now in future studies, I'm trying to look at some of the factors that can be used to influence people's perceived morality or moral commitment. Now there is some evidence, like in the human resources literature and training literature, that if people go through like ethics training, they can kind of, their level of morality or what they perceive as moral behavior in an organizational setting can be influenced. So that means, giving them specific types of security training and maybe focusing on the moral aspects. Like, for example, if you don't run your virus scanner or update your signatures, or you don't check on certain email attachments, you could be harming your organization or other people around you. Kind of appealing toward the moral aspect. That might be a way of influencing moral commitment. So we know in looking at this data that moral commitment is a big factor that predicts whether people would engage in this IS misuse. So I think it's something that deserves more attention. So you can see it's really the strongest factor here. Does anybody else have any thoughts on how maybe you can influence people's level of morality? Some might argue you can't. It's how you were brought up. It's years and years of experience.
I think you're on the right track. A lot of it is dispositioning based. So one of the stories here might be from an organizational perspective. We need to be much better on the selection on the front end, who we bring into the
screening
process, because we can't change them once they're here, given that morals may be ingrained over 20, 30, 40 years. However, given that you have a moral person, they still might not know once they're in the organization which behaviors in a very complex organization are considered right or wrong.
Yeah.
They want to do well, but they might not know what's right. They might even look to the other people in their organization to give them information as to what's right, but that's not always good information. So they may think they're doing the right thing, but in fact engaging in behaviors that maybe someone else might view as immoral.
So that kind of gets to the education aspect as well. So it looks like, if people, right, they want to do the right thing, that morality is a big factor in terms of whether they do these type of things. Although we do see here that, there's still going to be some segment, of your organizational workforce that would probably be what we consider immoral, or at least wouldn't view these type of misuse behaviors as immoral. So based on the results of this, at least we can still see that if they perceive the severity of punishment to be high enough, that seems to have some impact anyway for these less moral folks. I mean, you can almost think of it, say, you even have like one or two, all it takes is one or two insider type security incidents to cause a lot of havoc. So I think it's still important to consider these results as well, the severity, giving people a higher perception of the severity of cost to deter them from engaging in these activities. But it is a good point that kind of a takeaway from this is morality does have a big influence on whether people engage in these behaviors. Okay, so that was what I call the post hoc analysis. Okay, so again, kind of in terms of that post hoc analysis, the interactive effect, it depends. We see that the results depend a little bit on whether people are moral or not. That's one thing that kind of came out of this. Okay, so perceptions of being caught seem to be a greater deterrent for individuals with stronger moral inhibitions. Perceptions of punishment severity seem to be a greater deterrent for less morally inhibited people, is what this data has shown. Okay, so that's the study. This is kind of the discussion, what it all means. Found that perceived certainty and severity of sanctions They impact values, misuse, intention.